Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we enter the final length of our journey into the impossible lands by getting to the perhaps slightly infamous nation of Nex. Nex is your ultimate high fantasy adventure land. This is every thing you can imagine about wizards everywhere, magic everywhere, infused in every single piece. That's what Nex is all about. Created by the Arc Wizard Nex thousands of years ago, and even after his retreat to wherever he disappeared to when he lost the war against Geb, the nation continued on and continued being run by wizards, and you could almost perhaps not go so far as to say of wizards, by wizards, for wizards, but wizardry is the only view of power in Nex. If you are incapable of using magic, you're probably going to be considered a lesser citizen. It's the number one way to power and respect and standing within the cities and government and any other organization that's here probably relies heavily on spell casting, which is very interesting mechanically when you think about the shift from Pathfinder 1 to Pathfinder 2. But I won't get into that here. I have plenty of other videos that are all about my standings on the balance of Martial versus Caster. I can rant about that forever. Some of the big things to notice in Nex is it's beautiful in a way. Extremely colorful. Almost everything here is built with or infused with magic. So magic is everywhere and in everything. And you could probably think of it in terms of, imagine somebody built a magical paradise and then fast forward until it is decayed and falling apart, and there's just magical runoff and stuff. A lot of the water is poisoned by having so much magic in it, and it's got a not like post-apocalyptic kind of feel, but it's kind of got that, it's heading there. It's dystopian-esque magic power society that's just being held together by force kind of a feel. That's basically all of what Nex is, because it was just built on mages running everything and not being particularly great people. But it's hard to look at something like a nation and say, well, is that nation evil? And it's like, generally, no. It's the people who make it up that are going to be evil or not. But you look at Cheliax, and it's like, well, Cheliax is evil because part of their culture is devil worship and trying to emulate hell as much as possible. And so when you look at their values and that they fully embrace slavery and making deals with devils to get power, and a lot of higher ranking people actually have devils in their households, like imps and stuff, as servants and hired killers and all this stuff. It's like, well, then you can kind of see most of the upper echelons, the people in power in Cheliax, are evil. So you can kind of say, yeah, Cheliax as a nation is pretty evil. Whereas you look at Nex, and I don't think you could say it's on that level of evil, because they're just spellcasters, and they view power probably in the same way as Cheliax, because wizards are generally self-important, all-powerful, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. So it's got a lot of that in the ruling powers, but does that trickle down to everybody's day-to-day life? In Cheliax, yes, it does, because slavery is common everywhere, devil summoning is common everywhere, and so it's infused in their culture. Whereas Nex, magic is infused in the culture, but magic isn't good or evil. You can use it for both. But in a lot of places, the misuse of it is easily seen. And so I think in a lot of ways, you could sort of compare Nex to like a very post industrial revolution sort of society where, hey, they made all these cool things and now a lot of it's starting to run down and fall apart, and they don't have the means to keep everything at tip-top shape. Imagine if Nex, the arch wizard thousands of years ago, made all of these systems of like irrigation or architecture or whatever, and nobody's been able to match his power yet, so they can't unravel or even begin to fix a lot of the things that he created because he was on just another level to them. And so a lot of these things are probably falling apart, and these lesser wizards, hobble things together, jury rig stuff to make it work as much as possible, but in a lot of ways, a lot of things are probably still falling apart. And I think that sort of gives a good indication of what Nex is. It's very shining, brightly magical powered, but sort of also falling apart in the slow, like, decay of decades instead of, like, years. It's a very slow decline because Nex has been gone for thousands of years. And it's still a nation of great power. It's got a lot of different people, which is great. I'm always happy to see that. Magic items, of course, is going to be a huge thing here, as well as books. And the whole of the Impossible Lands is around the ocean, so I think every place has seafood. What's interesting to see here is that we have a massively wide array of religions. We have Sarenrae next to Lamashtu, and Pharasma thrown into the middle there, Nethys, Iori, Abadar. Like, this is the full gamut of the nation represents true neutrality, and everyone can just do whatever they want. Everything is accepted, as long as you don't go crazy. Like, the Demon Lord Abraxas is worshipped here, and there's even a part in here where it says that the followers of Abraxas, very specifically within the cities, do not practice ritual sacrifice and murder and stuff because that tends to put them at odds with the authorities. But they're still allowed to do their things so long as they don't break any laws, which most places would just be like, you're an evil organization who likes killing people. Like, we're going to stomp you out. But I think that's sort of a running thing with Jalmari and Nex, is like, they're open to everything. Just don't break their laws. Don't be a piece of shit. And you can practice. I think that's pretty interesting. And of course, the art here is fantastic. And this background, like, there's no blue skies around Nex. Like, they've all got this purple cloud, pink sky, like magical air pollution. And that's just crazy. I love that there's so many themes of like post-industrialism, except for with magic here, and the negatives of it. Because I don't think they really had much of the negative industrialism stuff going on in Alkenstar. That didn't really feel in any way a theme that they were going for. Here we have the map. And the capital city, Quantium, is right next to the ocean, kind of blocked by these islands here, so a little bit hard to do a naval assault against them, which is very well placed. We like that. But that also means that they're very far from Alkenstar, which is like right here. Actually, it's here. I think Dangan Hold is around here-ish. And there's another city here, I believe. So the more bustling stuff here is well away from Alkenstar. I think the capital of Geb is also like right down here somewhere. So Nex and Geb had like this clear line of this is where the war happens, right up and down here along the coast and in the middle some, and then Alkenstar's way the fuck over here. Like, you guys keep all of your shit over there and leave us the fuck alone. Because while there has been a ceasefire for thousands of years, they still have skirmishes between them because they're very diametrically opposed, even though you wouldn't really think so. Like, it's not good versus evil or anything. It's just power versus power. They're both mage schools. Like, you got necromancy here versus just all around high magic here. Although necromancy is outlawed in all of Nex, by and large, just because anybody casting necromancy could be a Gebbish spy. So that's very interesting that they sort of touch on that sort of thing when dealing with funerals and such. And then look at this water. Does that look safe to drink? That's every part of that just screams pollution. And it's magical pollution. I think that's a fantastic idea to play around with. But yeah, that looks nasty as fuck. All right, let us get to the next section. I don't want to share everything. If you want to get in depth with this, go buy this book. It's so good. Here we have another really cool picture. Just the style of art specifically for Nex, how it's not like super clean lines and how there's lots of like fuzziness, and it's like that makes you feel like there's just magic in the air that's just, you know, almost visible, and it's screwing your vision up some, like smog. Like there's magical smog in the air. I love that. That's so cool. Just reinforcing that post-industrial sort of idea. Then here we have a little bit cleaner skies. Got a lot of flying people, you know, wizards flying, and then winged people flying, and then carpets flying. And you gotta wonder, what are their sort of rules or regulations on flight within the cities of Nex? Because if you've got so many wizards that are capable of flight, and also there's lots of other creatures that live in Nexian cities that are also capable of flight, lots of winged species live here. So there's got to be maybe some, at least, guidelines on how to fly around without running into people or that sort of stuff. Because you got to think accidents have to happen every once in a while. So there's got to be... when there's a lot of traffic in the air, you got to imagine that there's problems. And there would have to be at least some guidelines, if not straight out laws, to obey. I do think it would probably be a little bit extreme if there was, like, flying police and stuff, because that is a little bit weird. I don't think there would be so many flying accidents that you would need that, but there would be some some rules, and what happens if some stupid apprentice wizard who barely knows how to cast fly runs into somebody. It's like, well, there has to be repercussions for that sort of thing, and the law must handle that. So it's interesting to think of that sort of thing. And then we get right into the capital of Nex, Quantium. And from reading through this, Quantum to me sort of feels like New York City, where it was built up and became this massive thing. And then think about what would happen if they lost most of their ability to build new stuff and maintain the things they have, which isn't too far from reality in a lot of places. Then I think that is what Quantium would be. A lot of things are falling apart because the wizards can't maintain all of Nex's supremely high magic creations. But Quantium is also basically the mixing pot, because everyone is allowed in Quantium unless you are a necromancer of some sort. So you can find humans next to gnolls, next to golems, next to devils, next to demons and angels and Ifrit, and like every sort of creature is welcome in Quantium. It is a giant mixing pot of high magic, and you can find everything and everyone here. And I think that is such an interesting idea to bring to your game, like a capital city that's just like, yeah, everybody's welcome here. Just follow the rules. There's lots of underground stuff. There's probably a huge black market for things because literally everything is available here. But as long as people are still doing trade and making money, and there's not, a lot of gang wars or species wars or just breaking the law in general, especially murder and violence and stuff, I think most of the police or whatever, it doesn't even go into the sorts of enforcement in Quantium. Like some cities, when you're reading their entries, they'll actually go into depth about what their police force looks like, because in Geb, it's very close to being part of their military, since they were basically almost founded as a military organization. Whereas Quantium doesn't really have that. There's just mages that go around and do these things. And you got to think, and I use this a lot in my homebrew stuff, the idea that if you know that your courtroom is going to have high-level spellcasters who can cast stuff like Zone of Truth on you, so that would exponentially expedite the way justice is served, because it's like, you're on the stand, tell me the truth now. And then bam, you're done. Innocent or guilty off that, and sentencing. Like, you could just, depending upon how many spell slots you have available to cast Zone of Truth, how many high-powered spellcasters you have, then you can go through and do that. However, mechanically speaking, that doesn't really work, because even with like Zone of Truth and stuff in Pathfinder 2 specifically, it's not guaranteed to work. Like, even like all those spells like that, it's only going to do the thing that a lot of spells used to just automatically do in Pathfinder 1. The enemy has to critically fail in Pathfinder 2 to get that sort of result. And so even something like Zone of Truth wouldn't be all that reliable, especially when you're dealing with like demons and devils and angels and stuff that just have, a lot of natural levels where they could outrank you in magical power and or saves. But I do love that idea. The core concept of that, having magic in your court system, is fantastic to me. I love that, and forcing people to tell the truth is an interesting thing to delve into and try to see like what the ramifications of that would be and how a society would create their legal system around that. Here we have the details for Quantum. Of course, it's level 20 settlement. 60,000 people, which is a decent number. It's not super high. Like when you think of modern cities have hundreds of thousands of people in them. So this isn't much. And there is a point in this section where it talks about humans being a minority because they're only 45% of the population, which is a lot lower than everywhere else. And if you've watched any of my other videos, I will continue to complain about this, that there are way too many fucking humans everywhere. Like, it's impossible for me to grasp. I know why it's like that, to make people feel comfortable because we're humans and we want to play in a human-dominated world. But I hate that shit. I absolutely hate that shit, that it's trying to, make a safe spot for the reader. Like, I absolutely hate that sort of shit. But this one particularly irritates me because, like, oh, humans are a minority. It's like, that's the same kind of ignorant bullshit that some people say that, oh, white people are a minority because there's more Asian people in the world than anything else. It's like, yeah, in certain places. But it's like, there's still orders of magnitude more humans than any other one thing. So you cannot, in good conscience, call them a fucking minority. So that part irritated me a lot. Like, if it was 25%, then I'd be like, yeah, that's decent. If any other one number was higher than humans, then I'd be like, yeah, then they're a fucking minority. But when they're 3 times higher than the next most populated species, no, not a minority at all. There's still far more humans than anything else. Because despite some douchebags, trying to spin shit as, oh, all the other things that aren't us can team up against us and then they outnumber us. It's like, yeah, that's never going to fucking happen. It's not going to happen in a fantasy world. It's not going to happen in the real world. There's no reality where anything like that ever happens because people do not work like that. People do not get along like that. People even of the same exact type, who grew up in the same area, who have all the same beliefs and shit, still don't get along all that well a lot of time. So no, trying to imagine that any other group is more efficient at working together than yours is stupid in most cases, except kobolds. Kobolds could accomplish that. They tend to work together very, very well. Kobolds are better than most people. Which, while you're here at the bar, tip your kobold waiters. Got all these different religions, which we saw in the beginning. We got the 4 main languages, which you got to imagine having dozens of different species in a place. You're easily going to find people that you can't communicate with because of language. And so you're going to have to buy some scrolls of tongues and stuff. I'm sure most people walk around with that sort of thing in their pocket just because. Threats, civil unrest, and political intrigue. The normal for higher levels of civilization. Nothing's weird anymore. Quantium residents regularly see extraplanar beings, travelers from afar, constructs, flesh forgers from Acanis, oozes from Onepian, and more walking their streets. Nothing surprises them at this point. Whether a character is a monster or a member of an obscure ancestry, heritage, or class, residents of Quantium are unfazed and rarely treat those characters differently than they would a human in the same circumstances, other than respecting the power of any being that's obviously dangerous. I love that. That is sort of the yes, this is a mixing pot. Everything's here, and people are used to that kind of shit. As much as I often like to play monster characters in lands where they do get treated poorly and they get treated like a minority that gets abused and stuff, I like playing that sort of thing to fight back against that. I really like fighting against slavery and injustices and racism and speciesism and all those sort of things. I like making characters that are specifically in those areas to fight back against that sort of thing. Because it's always good to beat the shit out of racist people. Racist bad guys. It just does. And they're good, easy bad guys to hate. You just throw slavery into stuff, and immediately you have, bad guys that are easy to hate. Which is why everyone should attack Cheliax. Yeah, just do it. These are some noteworthy people. Oh, this is a great picture right here. I love this. You just got a portal to who the hell knows where, and then you have this. What is this? I don't even know what that is. Some kind of demon, devil. Maybe that's a... It's probably in one of the bestiaries, and I just don't remember it. Because it does look sort of familiar. But that would be super cool if that was like a type of Quetzalcoatl that, what is it, Luis Loza, I think, wants to make those at some point. I think it was him. I know it was one of the Paizo devs, like their homebrew is that they statted out Quetzalcoatl and they're going to have all these different heritages of them, and he put one of them in the Grand Bazaar, which is probably one of the most interesting things in that book, because I saw that and I'm like, oh my god, that is awesome. I need more of these. And it's not feathered or anything, so this probably isn't a Quetzalcoatl, unless there's a specific heritage that's not feathered. But I'm pretty sure that's in the bestiary, and I just don't remember what it is right now. But I really want Quetzalcoatl as an ancestor at some point. Ooh. Besides dragons, those have always been a long-standing love of mine, but they don't get any representation anywhere, so haven't really been able to enjoy them all that much. So, aside from being the big mixing pot of magical decay that basically sums up everything Quantum is, and I really like this sort of thing where it's like, yeah, you can find everything here, even creatures who are normally evil, who normally eat humans on sight and that sort of stuff. You can find them here. And it's like, yeah, as long as everyone is following the law, then basically everyone is welcome. And in some ways, I'm sure you could put in like organized crime kind of stuff where people use their powers and such. And so running characters through Quantium who aren't super powerful, and you could easily brush up against creatures, like a 17th, 15th level creature, and they'd be like, yeah, you obviously get the feeling that this thing could wipe your whole party without much effort, and so you need to be careful when interacting with those kind of creatures. This is like the perfect space to run your campaign in, where as a GM you can have your party run into creatures way above their level, and it makes perfect sense for that to happen. Most of Pathfinder 2 is designed around, making balanced encounters because that's how the game works. But this gives a good way to narratively subvert that sort of stuff, as like, you don't know if you can win any of these fights because there's devils and demons and angels walking around here that, unless you have some real good lore and make some really, really good checks on this stuff, you have no idea how powerful these things are. They probably scare the shit out of you. And that is great. That is a very cool tool in your GM belt. Here we have the map of Quantium, and it's got 2 layers because it's a very big city. Which is very interesting. Got all these, especially if you figure if all of these, I wouldn't say skyscraper-esque, they're probably not quite that big, but there's some really big buildings here, and if the second level is tied together, like, this is obviously the ground floor because it has the most stuff around here, and this looks like it's higher up because all the bottom is out of focus. But this whole area here is on top of here, and there's nothing down here, so this whole area is suspended above nothing. Like, this is some crazy magical stuff here. And if you imagine a lot of these buildings either being connected, or it looks like there's roadways, so what does that look like in a city? Because none of the other pictures shown here really gives you a 2-tiered roads over roads sort of feeling. And I don't know, whenever I think about that sort of thing, it makes me think that you can't really do that, because then it would give no shade. I mean, it would just give shade everywhere, and then there wouldn't be a lot of sunlight coming in to grow anything within the city. And that's not just bad for plant life, but it's also bad for most people to not get sunlight ever. So having massive roadways built on top of buildings to make more buildings on top of, I just don't feel it like that's good development. Like, having tubes and walkways and stuff between buildings makes sense to me, but having outright roadways, I don't really like that sort of thing. Like, they would have to be very thin individual roadways between buildings instead of just like, hey, we built a road between these skyscrapers on the 40th floor. Like, that doesn't seem right to me. But without more pictures to really get a good view of it, I would say run it either way you like. This obviously suggests giant roadways, but that just doesn't sit well with me. But then we can see a nice picture of the outside looking in, so you can kind of see these layers. And the wastes. So Quantium is a great place to do lots of super high magic with, you could do some political stuff there. You could run a lot of interesting ideas for dealing with post-magical industrial sort of themes, and just dealing with lots of extra planar creatures and that sort of stuff. Like, There's devils that hold shops where they sell secrets for either money or maybe souls or whatever, and you could easily make story hooks and quest lines and stuff that are really bizarre. Like a devil might give you a tuning fork for another plane and cast plane shift to send you to a completely different plane or even a world to do a mission for them. And then, you have to keep this one item, and your party has to be completely together and use that item to return, or else you don't have a chance of ever returning. And you could make some really, really interesting adventures off from that. There's only one more city we're going to touch, and then we'll be done with the Impossible Lands. Until then, good evening.